Welcome to you all, as always, on this monthly rendezvous. And thank you all for joining us. I think a very good turn up so far, and I'm sure more people will be joining us. A special thank you to Mr. Isidore, all the way from DRC Congo, who agreed to be part of this as the main presenter on the topic that will cover cross-border trade and the impact of COVID-19 on this specific topic. I equally want to say thank you to Anizi Shimwe, who also agreed to be part of this conversation as the moderator. So as always, we keep it informal. After the presentation, we will have Q&A. And it's not always questions and answer, but feel free to provide your interventions. And it's a topic that is not new to all of us. So some of you have worked on similar topics. And again, it covers day-to-day life of people. So yeah, for Rwanda, I'm sure that cross-border trade refers to trade with Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, and Uganda, countries neighboring our country. And I was looking into some reports, and it is estimated that between 70% and 80% of cross-border traders are women, which shows how much of an importance this topic is. And 90% of these women traders rely actually on cross-border trade as their sole source of income. So recognizing the importance of cross-border trade as a major component of business in our countries, either Rwanda and DRC, and the particular important avenue for poverty alleviation with a strong gender impact. So this is a statement that I came across in a UNDP report that was published in November 2020. And I think you all agree that the majority of the employed Rwandan population, which I guess also in DRC Congo, is employed in the informal sector. Findings from the labor force survey indicate that over the past 3 years, more females were informally employed, with 92.5% in 2017 to 91.2% in 2019. And prior to the COVID-19 crisis, the same report states the unemployment had declined among females from 22.7% in 2016 to 17% in 2019. And this shows how much of an alarming this issue can be. So this one said, I don't want to go into the details. We have Isidore, who has actually worked on this topic in depth, published a paper, and then we'll be learning more from him. And on behalf of FES, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, I wanted to say welcome. Welcome to all of you. I hope we can make it more interactive, and not only to the speaker, but all of us providing our contributions. So I hand over to my colleague, Seth, the Executive Director of EPRIN, for his opening remarks, and then we'll be letting it go with Anezi and Isidore. Seth, over to you, and good to see you.
Thank you very much, Claude. I can see from my screen, the light is not good. I don't know if you can see me well, but it's fine. Good morning, Claude. Good morning, Isidore. Habari yako kwa hapo Congo. I hope mzuri sana.
Salama sana. Yeah.
Mzuri sana. Yes. Good morning, other participants. Yeah, it's a big pleasure to be with you all the way from DRC, Isidore Muri. So, dear participants, colleagues from FES and EPRN and our invitees, good morning. This is a culture at EPRN of hosting this Friday breakfast. It's not the first time we are organizing it. I think more than 10 times now. And as usual, we do organize, we do select a topic and we organize discussion whereby we invite a speaker. This time we will be discussing on generally impacts of the pandemic, COVID, on the formal trade between Rwanda and Congo. So we have a researcher who did the research through EPRN conference, Mr. Isidore, and he presented during the research conference, but we said it's good to give the opportunity to other participants, maybe who didn't have time to attend the conference, to know what is in this research. So the purpose of today's meeting is actually to learn from Isidore what are the key findings from this very, very interesting research, and also be able to brainstorm. You know, research never stops. Of course, Isidore and his partner, they did the research, but I know the research is very, very wide. We can give additional recommendations. Of course, in his research, he will show us some policy recommendations, but participants can also brainstorm on what are additional recommendations so that we can have this research well disseminated. So mine is just to welcome you on behalf of EPRN and FES. It's a partnership, strong partnership between EPRN and FES to organize this kind of policy dialogue, policy brief. Today, we are organizing the format of Friday breakfast, whereby we expect to have a big number of journalists. The journalists who are in the room, warm welcome. But also we said, why can we limit to journalists only? Because the topic is very, very interesting. We invited also other EPRN members and even the other participants outside EPRN who are interested in the topic. So without taking much of the time, I want to encourage journalists this. After this meeting, really journalists, I want to request you if you can develop like nice articles. The purpose is that you can disseminate the information from this research to a wider audience. So if there's a journalist, 1 or 2 or 3 who are interested to produce an article from this discussion, please after this, reach out to me or even to Isidore to have the full report, you know, so that you can really help us disseminating. The purpose, as I mentioned, is that the content of this research can reach a wider audience. The paper itself is published through EPRN website, the full report, the full paper, but we want to be like transformed in easy language, which can be read by the community. That's why journalists should be ready after this session to produce customized articles, which can be published in newspapers. So thank you very much. I want to say thank you for joining us, and I hope you will learn a lot from Isidore, and also I hope you will give recommendations, brainstorming sessions, which can add something, very addition to the research findings. Without further ado, I welcome you and I hand over to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Claude. Thank you, EPRN and FES for a warm welcome. And thank you, everyone, participants. I see, as Claude had said, a good turnout. And thank you to our speaker. I will introduce him shortly. But as they have said, my name is Anizi Ishimwe, and I'll be your moderator today. I work as the country manager of a company called Genesis Energy Holdings. We are in renewable energy, but we are also affected by cross-border trade. So I'm curious also to learn more from today's topic. But for the purposes of today, I'll be your moderator. I'll be facilitating the conversation, but for the conversation to go well, it would depend on everybody's participation. So I'm looking forward to a very interactive conversation. So without further ado, before I hand over to our speaker, I'd like to introduce him and share a bit more about his background, his work, and then he will walk us through a short presentation about the research that he has done. And then afterwards, we'll have a conversation. All right. So our speaker today, his name is Isidore Murhi Mehigo, and he's a junior lecturer and researcher in the Applied Development Economics Laboratory and in the Center of Expertise in Mining Management. And he works at the Université Catholique de Congo. Isidore holds a master's degree in economics and management sciences from the same university, Université Catholique de Bukavu. And he has another master's in globalization and development from the University of Antwerp in Belgium. He's also currently a PhD student at the Université Catholique de Bukavu in economics, and under the subject of economics, education and labor markets. So yeah, he usually speaks at different conferences and leads, many workshops. And he has written many scientific papers. I would only refer to two because there are many. The first one is titled "If the COVID-19 Came to Turn Down Everything," and then the subtitle is "E-Learning in Higher Education Institutions in Bukavu Town in the Democratic Republic of Congo." This one will be published soon in Revue Internationale de Technologie en Pédagogie Universitaire. It's a very high-level review. And then the second research, which will be our topic for today, is called "Subverting Borders Precarity and Vulnerability: The Socioeconomic Impact of COVID-19 on Informal Cross-Border Traders between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo." So that's the research that will also be our topic for today. In general, his domains of interest are in economics of education, labor economics, economics of artisanal mining extraction, and then informal economy and food security. So he has a broad range of interest, but for this particular conversation, we'll be looking at the research he did on the socioeconomic impact of COVID on the informal traders across the Rwanda-DRC border. So that's a bit about our speaker, Mr. Isidore. I would like to welcome you to share your research with us. And then in about 20 minutes, we will open it up to the greater audience for conversation. Thank you, everyone. Let me see. Did we lose our speaker?
I don't seem to see him.
Yes, he might have dropped off. I would like ask Aline to reach out to him privately to check if he might be having internet issues. And then in the meantime, we can converse until he comes back. Maybe in the chat box, can people share with us what is one expectation you have for this conversation? What are you looking to gain from it? Let's see. I'm waiting for your responses as we wait for our speaker. Yeah, let's share our expectations for this conversation, if we have any. It might also be, to be open-minded and learn as much as possible. So let's see if our speaker is back. No, he's not back.
He's facing some internet problems, but he'll be joining us very shortly. He's trying to connect back.
Yes, no problem. No problem.
Maybe Anis, you can
Right,
post
so
the question in the chat box.
oh yeah, okay, let me do that. So my first question is, what are your expectations for this conversation? And then another question I have would be, for those who attended previous breakfast sessions, whether digital or in person, you know, what is like one highlight that you can share with some of us that were not there? But I'm seeing some responses. So we have Lohandi Zihiwe, who said, I expect to hear the lessons learned from the impact of COVID and proposed recommendations to overcome/recover from the impact. Thank you, Laurent. Yvette Mukachivivi says, I expect to be aware about the trades or traders across the borders. Thank you, Yvette. Can we hear about other expectations? Calliope Duterimbere says, I expect to discuss the challenges that people doing cross-border business face and what kind of support in this context of COVID-19. That's a good one. Yeah, it would be, I would also be curious to know what kind of support is being provided to cross-border traders during this COVID-19 period. All right, can we get a few more recommendations? Okay, we have Jackie who shared that she's expecting to, she says challenges are inevitable, but I'm interested in measures to mitigate them. Thank you, Jackie. And then Jordi Michelle Musoni says, good morning, Anizi. I'm curious to know updates on this issue of cross-border trade between Gisenyi and Goma, as this border is probably the first having the highest movement worldwide per day. This is an issue that needs urgent solution after COVID struck both countries. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Jordi Michelle. All right, thank you very much for interacting with us. I see our speaker is back, and I'll do my best to summarize these expectations so that he also knows. Andrew says, I expect different solutions that will be proposed against non-tariff barriers despite COVID-19 pandemic. All right. Mr. Isidore, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right,
Can you hear me?
welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, we can hear you well. Yes, so I was interacting with the audience and they were sharing about their expectations. You know, some are looking forward to learning about the situation currently with cross-border traders, but it looks like the majority of them are expecting to learn more about the recommendations or the support that's available to those who were affected by, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic. So those are, you know, high expectations. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you.
And take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. So I was wondering with my my connection. I'm sorry for that. Let me first of all share my screen. Is it okay? Can I
Yes,
share my
please.
presentation? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So Anisi was present. I'm here to present this topic about the impact of COVID-19 on informal cross borders and between DRC and Congo. This study was made by two people, my colleague Héritier and myself. And it was welcomed by the EPIRON, who was asking researchers to make some of studies about this problematic. So what I wanted to share with you is that just to show you that number of vulnerable people has increased nowadays due to the COVID-19. And most of people who are in vulnerability have seen their capital loss, and many of them are in under financial stress. So people who are working in informal sector was mostly negatively impacted by this pandemic. And we saw that among those people who are in informal sector, we identify that informal cross borders and women have seen to be most large of the proportion who are involved in informal cross-border activities. So as we know, cross-border activities are among economic activities which is a part of economic integration, but this activity faces many constraints which push people to enter in or to integrate informal sector. So the borders between Rwanda and the DRC has been experienced an important change, and the result of this activity increase the economic interaction between the two countries. So despite many efforts made either by the government from Rwanda or DRC to formalize this sector still have many constraints which involve many people. So what we need to investigate in this paper is to see, to compare the situation before the pandemic and the situation during the COVID-19. So the objective of this is to explore whether the pandemic has a negative or a positive impact on people who are involved in cross-border activities between DRC and Rwanda, and to see what was the situation before and what is the situation nowadays. To do so, we do use, first of all, the literature review to see what was investigated already about this topic. And we do see that there is not a consensus between of informality. Informality still have main discussion in the literature, and we saw that some people want to show that informality is about just the activities which are not registered, whether other show that when a person can pay already the tax, it can be focused on, it can be classified in the formal activity. However, other scholars try to show that when people do pay tax, they bring what they call to formalize the informality. Mean that even there are some actors who are working for the government who do accept the existence of informality. So the problematic about informality is still in discussion among scholars. So in terms of methodology, we do use data from two categories. First of all, we use data collected in 2019, and it was a quantitative data. That data was conducted to see what was the situation before the COVID-19. And we do use also qualitative data between DRC and Rwanda, and we use the four border states. For those who know very well DRC and Rwanda, Bukavu is just near Kamembe, and we have two kind of borders, which are Lusisi 1 and Lusisi 2. And in Goma, which is the province of North Kivu, we have also two kind of borders, which are Petite Barrière and Grande Barrière. And we do use data from all informal cross traders who are involved in such activity. So we use a structure questionnaire for the first data collection, and we do use just an interview, a semi-structured questionnaire for interview to have qualitative data. In terms of analysis, we do use also quantitative data to analyze the situation before the COVID-19, what was the situation for this category of people, and to analyze the risk or the vulnerability faced by the cross-border traders involved in this activity. So many activities was investigated among those who sell and many kind of of goods, which generally are goods which are sold in small quantities. So, what did you found? First of all, we found that before the COVID-19, still those people was already in poverty. If we take a look to the average income, we can see that the minimum income for the two countries is low than what is recommended by the World Bank. Someone who gained just $160 is not can't say monthly, can't say that he's able to cover his needs. So among them, we saw that around 70% of those people are in poverty. So when we triangulate with nationality, we saw that if we add this number, we can see that there is a huge number for people who are categorized in poverty, both in Congo and in Rwanda. And just a few number of them are not in poverty, but they are at the line of poverty, means that with a small catastrophe, they can fall in poverty. So when we compare with these figures, I don't know if everyone is not an economist to understand this, but I will try to explain. So this is the line of poverty, the poverty line. If this line could be, if this line could be confused with this, we could say that there is no inequality between the people involved. But this distance shows that there is inequality between people who are involved in this activity. Mean that even though they are all in the same activity, but among them there is a certain percentage of inequality between them. When we compare DRC and Rwanda, we found that the inequality is more pronounced in DRC, or for cross-border trader who are in DRC, who have the nationality, Congolese nationality, than in Rwanda. Mean that in Rwanda, the inequality is lower than what we found in DRC. And this is just the summary of this when we combine the two things. This is a situation before the COVID-19. Mean that almost they were already in vulnerability situation. Those who are categorized in to be not in poverty or to be non-poor has also a risk to become poor with the pandemic. What we saw, we show with what happened. So people who was investigated, they say that they do not have access to financial credit, and this situation will have increased while the pandemic came. So they face also to the problem of excessive taxation, and this bring another discussion about how can someone who is qualified to be informal can pay taxes. Actually, those are informal taxes, mean that this money is not canalized in the government basket, but in individual pockets, and that bring that the activity do not allow the economy or our economies to generate income from these activities. So also, we found that the existence of precarity and poverty, as shown in the figures, the pandemic do increase the goods prices. So some of people who was investigated, they say that this pandemic has bring people to stay home due to the lockdown. Goods became very scarcity, so it was difficult to move from one border to another. The increase in capital, the decrease in capital and customs. Here, they say that if they have to stay home, they do consume all the capital they had, and they found after that they are not able to have, after the lockdown, to have some amount to restart the activity. And this increased their situation of poverty. And for those who continue the activities, they said that even though there are some measures which was dictated by the authorities, they say that still the taxation persists. And for many of them, they say that they have actually, the vulnerability increased due to the bankruptcy which they are victim. So this is what I said, that even the price increased around over 100%. So there are some strategies which was proposed by the government to limit the spread of the pandemic. And one of those was to encourage those people to work actually in group, mean that the strategy to put money together and buy in group. But this strategy was not only, that do not have only a positive effect, but also a negative one for them. They say that actually they're not able to find their clients. They do not communicate very well with people. They communicate in formal time, and it used to, they had to use intermediary in the activities, or using an intermediary means that you have to pay this person who will be used as an intermediator. So this negative impact of activity do reinforce actually the informality of this activity. So the impact of this activity of this pandemic was also the reduction of services, and some of people who was involved in this study do agree that the harassments also do increase, because now they have the intermediately, actually they are the people who worked at the border, and that become for this for the cross-border trader a very huge problem. So despite these advantages, we saw that there is some advantages which can bring this activity to be formalized. One of the advantages is to say to bring people to work together, and when they work together, mean that they can actually make a command, and this command can be controlled by the state authorities, and in long term, maybe it can help to formalize the sector. So what can be learned about this, or what do we suggest to increase or to limit the effect of COVID-19 for this category of people? First of all, is to increase their possibility of access to financial system. You know, when you are in informal sector, it's very difficult actually to have a formal credit. So the stakeholder from the policy makers, they can use this opportunity of COVID-19 to give the credit to these people, and then they can control the system. We saw that also there is a policy which are not adapted to this activity. They do not actually take what to say, the consideration that is given by people who are at the ground. So also we found that the lack of infrastructure is also a problem. People who are involved in these activities do not have actually the place where they can freely trade their merchandise, and this is a problem. There is also a problem of bureaucracy. So to most of them who want to formalize their activity, they found that the procedure is very, very long, and this cannot allow them to formalize the activity. And also, as they have a very low capital, they say, why do I want to formalize the activity? Because when I start the procedure, this even can bring me to lose everything. So there is also non-tariff barriers. Among those non-tariff barriers, we can mention what we call, for example, the harassment which people are victims. So to limit harassment, limiting harassment can bring people to be formalized, and this activity to contribute actually to the public basket. So also, it will be good for the governments to take policies who are not up down, but begin down, understanding what is the needs of these people, what they can do, and this can help to contribute to the actually to limit their vulnerability. So still today we have a lockdown because we can't move freely from Congo to Rwanda or from Rwanda to Congo. We're still in this situation, and this paper is just an overview. Still, we need to investigate deeply and to have quantitative data in order to see actually how things are going till today. So in terms of recommendation, that was our recommendation. I think this is what we found, and it is just an overview of this situation, which is still going on. Thank you, everyone, for listening. That is our contribution to this breakfast. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Isidore, for a very interesting presentation. I took away so many things. One of them being, the fact that you showed the two countries were already, in poverty, right? So we're talking about precarity and vulnerability at these borders, but it's not something that was started, during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think what COVID-19 did was to, exacerbate or make worse the situation that was existing at the borders. We're talking about, cross-border traders, specifically. You talked about, different challenges. One that I feel like stuck in my head was when you shared how, because people were staying at home with their capital, they would end up kind of consuming the things that I would normally trade, so that's interesting to see how instead of making, let's say, a profit on the things I would have traded, they end up consuming them, leading them to bankruptcy. And then, you did with recommendations. Of course, recommendations have to come from different players. There is the role of government, there is the role of financial players. We saw that one of the challenges they're having is access to finance. So there has to be like a multi-sectoral approach to solving this issue. So I would say those are my takeaways. But we also saw that some good things came out of this. You talked about people, coming together, less harassment at the borders. Even I think you called it excessive taxation. I don't know if you were not trying to use the word corruption, but those things that I guess were highlighted, even though we already knew that they existed. So thank you very much. I have a few questions before I open it to the public. One was, I'm wondering if during a crisis, people usually switch to alternatives. If you were depending on the goods that come from DRC and the border is closed, you still have to live, one way or another. And people usually adopt alternatives, instead of drinking yogurt or milk from the other side, you just end up using what you have on your side. And I'm wondering if we are going to see these alternatives be adopted beyond COVID-19 pandemic, and in a sense affect the trade permanently, if that if my question makes sense. So that's the first question I have. I think we can start with it and then I'll ask my second one and then we can move to the audience. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Actually, through the paper, we do show that yes, when during the lockdown, some of the people do take some alternative, and some change actually the activity they do use to involve activities which are not concerned by the cross-border. For example, some of them do integrate agriculture, and some of the other do actually integrate artisanal activities and so forth. Other actually do consume the whole capital, means that they do not have, even after the lockdown, the possibility to reintegrate their former activity. That was the concern with these people. That's one of some of the alternatives they do use to mitigate or to face the problem of the lockdown. I don't know if I really answer your question, but we do contribute even for the paper to improve it. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you. Another question I have, I mean, I'm not sure like at what point during the pandemic, the research was done, because my assumption is that the way people were affected in the beginning is different, let's say, from the way people are being affected now, because, we are at a point where we've been in the pandemic for, close to 20 months at this point. But my question is, because the two sides are led by two different, governments, meaning the initiatives usually to help people recover from the two sides are usually different. So I'm wondering if you've seen, how would you compare the efforts of recovery for the cross-border traders on both sides, so the DRC side and the Rwandan side? I'm assuming there is a difference, but it doesn't have to be. I'm just curious to see if the recovery of the trade on both sides is going in like similar ways, or if there's a difference.
Actually, there are two different government and policies applied are also different. For example, we do see that the rule of law in Rwanda is very observed than what it is in Congo. That's the big difference. And even when we speak about the harassment, you can see that in the Rwanda side, it do exist, but it's not like it in Congo, because the rule of law in Rwanda do actually works, but in DRC there are some people who manage to escape the law, even in the states authorities or in the side of people who cross the border.
Right, thank you. So I'm going to open it up to the rest of the audience. Thank you very much. I've seen some questions already in the chat. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to go. I'm thinking the best way would be, I don't know if Mr. Isidore, you can see the chat box. I would just be asking one question and then you can take it and we can move to the next one. But I'm also encouraging the rest of the audience to type your questions, even your comments. As Claude said in the beginning, it doesn't have to be a question, it can be a comment, an intervention. You know, as they have said, this is an ongoing research. So your inputs, you know, might help with I don't know, the improvement or the continued bettering of the paper itself. But let's go to some of the questions. I think the first question was from Andrew saying, who is harassing these Congolese traders? Is it on the Rwandan side or the Congolese side? I think you just touched on it when you said there is harassment on both sides. In Rwanda, it's very minimal, but on the Congolese side, it's much more pronounced. So I think that answers your question, Andrew. And then Jacqueline asked, I am wondering if these findings carry equal magnitude from the two countries. I feel like you had touched on it, but you can also, you know, quickly answer Jacqueline and then we can move to other questions. Do you feel like these findings have equal impact or magnitude on the two countries?
Actually, no, because you know, as I said, as we have two countries and different policies, the politics, policy applied in Congo was not the one who in Rwanda. Actually, they take one policy which is common to say, okay, let's close borders. This is for the two countries. But how to now to manage to sell and to buy goods from one country to another, that is an internal policy which can affect differently the people. And I think in the future, we need actually to investigate what the difference between the effects deeply in DRC and in Rwanda. I think we can, as we do have some people before who was involved in this activity before the pandemic. If we will try to see if we can find some financial support to find the same people and to see what was their reaction and how they was actually affected by the pandemic, and then we can make the comparison between the two. But on this tape, we are not able to say actually the real effect, because we do use qualitative data, and we don't have the magnitude actually in terms of figures. That is what I can answer to this question. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Andrew also asked, he said, can the presenter be a bit explicit in highlighting these rigid policies and non-tariff barriers so that there is a solution to ease these problems? I am not sure if that makes sense. Like, could you be more explicit about what those rigid policies are? I believe someone else asked the same question. I think it was Rita who said, thanks for the presentation. The speaker talked about policy inconsistency. What policies were found to have the biggest gaps? So it sounds like we're interested in having the details about these policies you said are either rigid or, they have inconsistencies.
So about the policies, it's when you say the policies applied are not consistent, it means that when the authorities, the state authorities takes some policies, they do not integrate in those policies that there is people who are concerned are people who do have actually a low capital. And with a low capital, it is not possible to observe all the recommendation to become a formal small trader. Because imagine someone who do have just only let's say just $50 as a capital. To be formalized, he needs to pay more than that amount. So the policy which asked him to pay more than such amount is inconsistent, because no one will give the whole capital to be formalized. The idea is to say, okay, let me stay informal because the policy is not allowing me to be formalized. For example, if only the policy can ask him or her to pay just $5 and say, okay, with $5, you can have all the documents you need to be formal. That can be a consistent policy. That's why I say the policy was not consistent about it. Yes, perhaps it can be done in DRC, but when we go to the other side, it is not applicable. That's why we need the consultation between the two countries to say, okay, what is the policy, which can be a mixed policy, to apply for such category of people, and to see what the country can gain in such mixed policy. Just I was trying to just to show the consistency of this policy. I don't know if I'm finding exactly the answer, but if someone have another perspective of answer, can just add and allow me to improve in the future the paper. I think the paper is online and it can be read by those who.
It was already shared in the chat box. So I believe people can have access to it.
Sorry?
Yeah, but so I was saying your paper was shared in the chat box, but the link to your paper was shared in the chat box. So people will have access to it. But on this policy issue, to summarize, it sounds like you were basically saying the requirements that the people have to meet for their businesses to be formalized are, I'm going to say, I don't want to use the word rigid, but they can be difficult for some people to meet them, making it almost impossible for their businesses to be formalized, which is what the majority of people end up staying in the informal sector. You talked about if they have to meet each one of the requirements, they might end up using all their capital in the process of formalizing the business instead of just using that money to actually trade. So that's what I took out. That's what you were defining as inconsistencies or rigidity of policies. But I don't know if there is any other policy, because I feel like that's one thing But if there isn't, we can move on to the next question. Let me see. Several people saying, thank you for your presentation. It was informative. We have Desiree Mugisha saying, Goma and Gisenyi is a win-win situation for the Congolese and Rwandese. What is done to harmonize this cross-border policy? Desiree, I'm not sure if your question is understandable. I don't know if you're talking about a specific policy or the trade situation in general. And then we have Diane Mushimimana from Collated Lab saying the current outbreak of the coronavirus disease pandemic has created additional pressures for these cross-border traders in both sides. These include loss of income due to the border closure, lack of customers and supplies, poor performance of saving groups, etc. Therefore, which effective strategies to use while improving their business? Thanks for this fruitful presentation. So Isidore, the question here is, the person highlights all the challenges that these traders are facing, and they were asking what strategies do you think are effective for them to either improve or recover their lost businesses? Let me know if that question makes sense.
Okay, I think as we gave recommendation, everything is not in the recommendation, but here we can say that for people who do lose their capital, actually we need government support, and the government can give subsidies to see how to help them to restart the activity. And in this way, I think they can even give them all state papers which help them to restart formally. It can be one of the proposition. Also is we can call for assistance from NGO to see how to help them, and asking them to work together. As already with the lockdown, they do begin to work together. I think it will be important to continue in this way and to say, okay, let's group them in association, and when they work in association, it will be easy for not only the state to control them, but also for them to conjugate their efforts and to gain more than working each other in his corner.
Okay, thank you. As a follow-up question to that, though, it sounds like the biggest burden is kind of put on the government to help people recover. Do you think there is a role of the private sector to play? Because normally, business or trade, as much as it can be facilitated by governments, it is really, the private sector. So as much as the governments have roles to play, do you think there is the role to play to be played by the private sector on both sides?
Yeah, actually, we live in the world which is actually dominated by the private sector and regulated by the states. So even when we are in the private sector, still the states play a huge role. That's why I think the private sector can play a role, of course, but actually I don't have clearly the idea how it can happen, because the private sector is characterized by the profit, and still when you ask the interest to people who actually do not have begin the activity, it can be difficult. But the private sector, for example, banks can give a loan to those people if the people present the need and they give a motivation in which activities they will put the money they gain from the bank. I think it can be one of the alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are honored to have Ambassador Charity Manyeruke in our midst, who's the Zimbabwean ambassador to Rwanda. And she says, thank you for the presentation. She's asking, has COVID-19 affected the types of goods and the quality of goods traded between the two countries?
Yes, thank you. Through the paper, we show that from the results that when the traders want to actually to work in a group, sometimes they can have goods which was command but not conform with the commands. That's one of the problem, and it actually impacts the quality of goods. Also, when before the COVID-19, the cross-border could cross the border and the same day return with his goods. But nowadays, he needs to make a command, and he can wait for 2 or 3 days before having the delivery, and that's also a negative impact on goods. And there are some goods who do not need to be stored for more than 2 or 3 days, and that can affect actually the quality of the goods who are traded. Thank you.
All right. No, thank you. Let me see if there are other questions. We are getting close to the end of our conversation. If you have any questions that you still have, please feel free to write them in the chat box. Let me go to other questions. Kamahad Nkurunziza is asking what people affected by this pandemic who did cross-border trade will overcome those issues. I am not sure if this question is understandable.
He said, what people affected by this pandemic who did
cross-border trade will overcome those issues. I think I'm happy to rephrase your question, unless you understand it, Isidore.
Or he can just speak in order to explain more.
Yes. Yeah, Kamarad, if you're still on the call, you can rewrite your question. In the meantime, I'll just move on to Michelle's question. He's saying it is also important to mention the good collaboration between both governments to facilitate this movement. For example, using jeton instead of passeport or laissez-passer. I understand that a movement of over 50,000 people per day is difficult to organize and control. I would recommend to organize these small traders in cooperatives or formal associations and build stores on both sides where goods will cross in big quantities. Then these formal cooperatives can access finance easily, pay taxes, respect rules, and avoid violences of individual traders, especially in Goma. It equally facilitates transition from informality to formality. Thank you very much for your recommendation. Isidore, I think this is mostly for you as you are working to incorporate the feedback to your paper, but Michelle, I think this is a very good recommendation. And then we have Andrew, who says, you mentioned about inadequate capital apart from governments. Don't you think private sector financial institutions' role, interest reset on loans so that traders can easily access capital during the COVID-19 as a recovery measure as well? Andrew, if I understand your question, you're basically saying that apart from the government, is it possible for the financial sector maybe to reevaluate their interest on loans to make it easier for the cross-border traders to access capital? He's asking you, Isidore, do you think that is an option?
Yeah, as I said, I mentioned that there is an option for banks to give loan, and mean that the government, which is regulate activities, can actually group those people with private sector to say, okay, what can be the rates of the loan which can be given to these people who were affected by the pandemic. It's an option, and I think this can help actually nowadays. It's a good observation, and I think it's gonna work if the government do facilitate this, because as I said, we are in a world where private sector is there for more and more interest. When they decide to decrease the interest, it must be motivated by something or from the obligation to the government. That's what I think about this. But it's a good recommendation which can be started by the states. I mean,
no,
state authorities.
I totally agree. I also believe, banks, their interests are they're in the business of interest. That's what really sustain their business. So there has to be an incentive, for them to do that. Either, as you said earlier, there has to be maybe a subsidy from the government or from another international bank that would like to contribute to recovery efforts. But to approach any bank that is in the business of selling capital, it would be a difficult sell for them to reduce their interest. But I know there are other institutions whose sole purpose is to ensure that there is access to capital to, informal traders or small businesses. So yes, so yeah. Anyways, so we are coming to a close. Before I give it back to our hosts, I'm curious to hear what people took away from this conversation. So you can also put that in the chat box. In the meantime, I'll be reading the last few questions. But as we start to close, I'm curious to hear what are your key takeaways. In the beginning, we talked about expectations. We are now coming to a close. I am not sure if your expectations were met or exceeded, so you can share all of that. In the meantime, I'll be reading the final few questions. I had read the question from Andrew. Desiree says, I was just asking if there is something that can be done to make together both sides, Rwanda and Congo, for improving the current policy to allow people to trade formally. So this question is basically, do you think the requirements to formalize businesses, do you think they can be made simple so that this transition from informal to formal trading happens faster? Desiree, I'm just paraphrasing your question. I hope it makes sense. So Isidore, you can take that one away as well.
Yeah, I agree with Desiree because there is many policies which can be which can improve the transaction between Congo and Rwanda. For example, to determine, for example, what activities or what goods need to be involved in small, I can call it small trade, because when we define those kind of goods, we still have people who will not adhere to those policies. That's why, and we can't imagine that we can formalize totally the sector. It's impossible. We still have people who do not agree some policies and who do escape the law. But I think if the two governments work together and make a clear definition about what can be done by whom, it can improve the transaction between those people. Because also, there are two countries which are very close, very closer down. Mean that there are still we have people who will need to trade unofficially and in the informal. That's why it will be good to define some policies about the category of goods. But keep in mind that we will still have those who will escape the law, actually. If Desiree have an addition comment, you can provide in order to see what can be done in the future, and to investigate, for example, about what kind of policy those people would like to have in order to be formal. Because that, as I say, we don't need policy which are from which are up down, but which can come down from those people themselves. They say, okay, we need this. And when they give their proposition, I think it can be good and applicable than going in the office and writing just policies which are from I don't know where. That's my point of view.
All right, thank you, Isidore. So the last question we have is from Muhire. His comment is, the cross-border traders do it as way of daily survival, survie. Any form of formalization needs to, first of all, I think there's something here that says the sustainability of their business. And then he says, I don't know if there are data showing how much time any cross-border trader stays in business. And then he comments and says a deep understanding, starting by asking them what they need and how they can be developed or supported is required. I think his question is interesting because he's asking, has there been any research done to see how much time the average informal cross-border trader stays in business? We can answer that, and then I'll pass it on to Claude to close our session. Thank you.
I think still there is a research. I can recommend you to read, for example, the research from Titeka, 2012. There are something which can answer to this question. Also, I think there is a report from the World Bank in 2021 about the cross-border between DRC, Rwanda, and Uganda. And I think we can find other documents, but if you need more documentation, I can check and give you, but figures, I don't have figures in my head right now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Isidore. Thank you, everyone, for engaging in this conversation. I learned a lot personally, and from your comments and takeaways, it looks like there was a lot that was learned. Isidore, I'm hoping you also took notes regarding people's feedback on how you can improve this research paper. So I look forward to seeing most of you in the future on other digital breakfasts or in-person breakfasts, you know. For now, I'll pass it on to our host, Claude and Seth, to close us out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.